This episode of Comics for Fun and Profit is brought to you by Threadless. More importantly, the Comics Fun Profit shop on Threadless at comicsfunprofit.threadless.com, where you can find, about half a dozen different designs, plenty of Comics for Fun and Profit themed merch. If you just want a t-shirt, you're good, and if you want sweatshirts or other swaggy items, and you can get anything. Phone cases, shower curtains. It runs the gamut. Skateboards, I think. So check that out. We've already sold several. We're excited about the fact that the folks that want to support us in this way are able to and wear our merch out in the real world. That's pretty exciting stuff. So get your Comics for Fun and Profit branded items at comicsfunprofit.threadless.com.
Aloha! It's Jason from Hawaii. Welcome to a special edition of the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast. In this episode, I will be interviewing friends of the podcast, Chris, Doc, Wyatt, and Gavin Hignight. They are here with their friend, Jennifer Fisher. Now, I have interviewed Doc and Gavin before. That was in episode 636 that came out on May 5th of 2021. Wow, that was a long time ago, guys. That really was. So,
in so many ways.
yes. They are here to promote the Nancy Drew retro-style action figure Kickstarter. Now, this campaign is live and will end on May 17th. Nancy Drew has been a part of pop culture since 1930. That started off with the novels, then movies, TV show, video games, comics, and so forth. Doc, Gavin, and Jennifer, welcome to the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast. How are you guys doing today?
It's a fantastic
well,
day. Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah, doing good. Cannot complain.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm just going to go over Doc and Gavin. I'm just going to go over your brief history, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong or on anything. So, Doc is a writer-producer who has worked on the Napoleon Dynamite movie. And for TV, he's worked on the Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and Star Wars Resistance. Gavin is also a writer-producer who has worked on Star Wars Resistance, Marvel's Spider-Man, and has written a webcomic called The Concrete World that is now available in a trade paperback from Rebel Sidekick Studios. Also, too, Doc and Gavin founded Wandering Planet Toys. And correct me if I'm wrong, was that back in 2020 or 2021?
Oh, Doc, is that 2020?
I think it was 2021.
Okay.
Officially.
Yeah, with the pandemic, it seems like it was 10 years ago. So.
Yeah. We were talking about it for a long time before that. But I think officially 2021.
Yeah. That's when we went out with The Prisoner. Yeah.
Yes. And then I'm going to come back towards the end to talk a little bit about The Prisoner from the TV show, that toy line as well.
Cool.
Now, Jennifer, are you okay if I call you Jen?
Yeah, that's fine.
So Jen is an attorney and is a Nancy Drew consultant for movies. She was a consultant on the 2007 Nancy Drew movies, 2 books, the Nancy Drew Pocketbook Mysteries, 2 merchandise. She has given lectures about Nancy Drew around the country and has written articles that have appeared in the LA Times and the Sleuth, to name a few. She is a collector of Nancy Drew memorabilia, and she is currently writing a biography of Carolyn Keene. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Mildred Worth Benson, the real Nancy Drew, and she is the president of the Nancy Drew Sleuth. Jen, first off, do you need to correct any of my information on that? Or?
No, that's perfect. Perfect.
And then also, too, I want to ask you this question. Who is Carolyn Keene?
Carolyn Keene, yeah, she's a pen name. It's a pseudonym for various authors over the years that were ghostwriters writing for the Stratemeyer Syndicate and currently SIMON Schuster. So it's been different people. The first Carolyn Keene was Mildred Ward Benson, who you mentioned, I'm writing a book about. For the classic Nancy Drew series of the first 56, which these action figures are based on, there were 8 ghostwriters for that entire 1930 to 1979 run. There's been many, many since then.
All right, no, thank you very much. Now, Doc and Gavin, did you guys want to add anything, or want to point out anything, any of your previous work?
Yeah, well, I'll point out something that fascinates me is that Jen also has curated a Nancy Drew basically museum experience that's worth mentioning.
Oh, okay. So
So I'll just briefly tell you, in 2019, right at the end of 2019, right before the crazy pandemic we went through, I donated my entire Nancy Drew collection, or most of it, to the Toledo Public Library. So in the downtown branch, you can, I donated over 4,000 items, books, collectibles, ephemera, memorabilia, and they have a room in the children's section of the downtown library. It's a huge library. It's beautiful. The children's section is phenomenal. They have a mystery room that's kind of vintage to the start of the library. The wood, the architecture, everything in that room is so cool. And my collection, a bunch of it is in that room. Some of it's down in a special secret archive. They rotate it out. So fans can go to Toledo, Ohio, and just kind of like go to, it's almost like a Nancy Drew museum in and of itself. And there's original cover art. So it's pretty cool.
Jen, I'm sorry, I'm going to continue on.
Okay.
Yeah, so now before I start the interview, I want to give a big shout out to Hannah Bahedri of Superfan Promotions. Hannah, thank you very much for, asking us, the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast, to do this interview and doing all the behind the scenes work, ranging from coordinating this interview. Gavin, Doc, and Jen, do you guys want to add anything to that?
No, Hannah's fantastic.
Yeah, just our appreciation to David and Hannah, and just the great care they put us under as we try to get the word out about these figures.
Yeah, they've been amazing.
And then I also want to give a shout out to The Beat and their article that they wrote on this Kickstarter campaign, the blog of comics culture. I got it from The Beat, and it's the blogs of comics culture. I got some of the information from their article that was dated on April 7th of this year, 2023, and it was titled Wandering Planet Toys to Launch Nancy Drew Toy Line Kickstarter Campaign by Timur Dar. Now, if you guys get a chance, please check out that article. All right, I'm going to start off, Doc, I'm going to start off with you, then Gavin, then Jen. Now, where can listeners follow you on social media?
I'm on Twitter, still, with no blue check mark, but it's definitely me. I'm also on Instagram, so I could be followed on as Otherland71. That's OTHERLAND 71 on Twitter and Instagram.
Gavin?
And I'm going to change my Twitter to official Doc Wyatt and get a check mark. So could get a little awkward. So I'm active mainly on Instagram, Gavin Hignight, just my name, Instagram, and then Wandering Planet Official is our official Wandering Planet Instagram, and Twitter as well. And those are also great places to see what we're up to.
Jen? And where can listeners
follow? So we are our Nancy Drew fan group. We have a presence, and then I myself as Nancy Drew expert have a presence on different ones. So we have Twitter, Nancy Drew fans, and at Nancy Drew expert. And then we are on Facebook, and you can find us on Facebook. We have just searching the groups. We have Nancy Drew book fans. That's our most active group. We have groups for the games, groups for the TV show. We have a book club where people read the books. We have a book hunting group, a book sale group. So yeah, you can find us through the main Nancy Drew fans, Nancy Drew book fans there. And then let's see, Pinterest, we're on there as well, and Nancy Drew SLEUTHS and Nancy Drew Expert. You can see a lot of the collection that I donated to Toledo and stuff I still have here at home on Pinterest boards. And then let's see, Instagram, Nancy Drew Expert and Nancy Drew SLEUTHS there. So you can find us at all those places. Oh, and then my website, nancydrewsleuth.com, and then nancydrewfans.com for our fan group.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Thank you, guys. So now, before we start talking about the Nancy Drew campaign. Doc and Gavin, just for our for new listeners, may I ask, can you guys give a brief history of how, Wandering Planets got started? I know you guys said that you guys were talking about it, then you finally decided to launch it, I believe, like in either 2020 or 2021.
Yeah. So Doc and I, we work together in various creative capacities, doing the writing stuff on like, animated series, stuff for like Marvel and Transformers and, that kind of fun stuff. And the whole time while doing that, when we should have been working, we were probably talking about toys. Because we're both avid toy collectors, and it's just a passion we both shared. We are both kind of do-it-yourselfers and make things happen kind of people. And there was just a point where it felt like, well, we love this art form and this collectible so much, and we're very opinionated, and there's things we feel like are missing from our toy shelves.
Yes.
And one of those things was The Prisoner, from the classic TV show. And we just kind of, I will say Bill at Fresh Monkey Fiction had become a friend of ours.
Yes.
And Bill really helped, shepherd us as we were like navigating the waters of let's do a toy for the first time. So as, rolling up our sleeves and kind of jumping into a pool we'd never swam in. Yes. And at the same time being helped by people like Bill, by people like Chris over at Amazo Toys. And, my gosh, here we are. We're jumping into a new one, A Prisoner, we're glad to say, went really well for us. The toys came out exactly as we intended,
yes.
Which is not always the case for everyone. And we're still learning and improving on some aspects, like, the boring stuff that's like fulfillment and shipping, but which is crucial besides being tedious. So yeah, we just we wanted to do it, so we jumped in.
Doc, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, that's a perfect summary. I mean, really, it was something, it was Gavin it was his idea at first, and he brought it to me, and it was like, oh, we have to do this. We have to do The Prisoner. I mean, just that show meant so much to me as a kid. And so being able to sort of celebrate it and remember it and advance it through the toys, just an honor.
Listeners, real quickly, when Gavin said Bill's name, because he has his because correct me if I'm wrong, Gavin, Fresh Monkey has they did the they had the Eagle Line Force.
They started out strong with the Eagle Force Returns.
Yes.
And for folks who aren't super hardcore 80s toys fans, the original Eagle Force were like little, maybe like 3.5-inch die-cast soldier toys that G.I. Joe just completely blew out of the market. I think the originals were from Remco. They're really neat, interesting little toys. And Bill brought them into the scale and style of G.I. Joe as, one of the early people to go to Kickstarter and say, I'm going to make a toy line, and talk about someone who really paved a road and learned some hard lessons with like factories overseas and stuff like that. And I was a fan of what he was making. That's how I met him, is because I was buying all those toys.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, I have all the Eagle Force stuff. I love it. And I met him at conventions and just kept talking about toy stuff. And turned out Doc knew him from some other. We both knew him. Independently of each other.
Yes.
And he had a lot of valuable insights and lessons and relationships to help us with.
Gavin, Doc, thank you very much. Okay, now I'm going to start talking about the campaign. Now, in the campaign video, Jen, I love the reference because you, Doc, and Gavin, worked on this campaign, and I love how you reference the three of you as Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. That was great.
Thank you.
I think Doc and I appreciate that too. We've been
it's
elevated.
Like, yeah, we had to sleuth around a lot to get this going, especially the Hardy Boys here.
It's true.
All right. So Jennifer, I'm going to start off with a question, and Doc and Gavin, I'm going to ask you to join in, or please feel free to just jump in too. So Jennifer, I'm going to ask you, for our listeners, I don't know too much about Nancy Drew, only from the TV series back in the 70s. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I am that old. First, who is Nancy Drew?
Well, Nancy Drew is this teenage sleuth who lives in River Heights, which could be anywhere. And she loves to solve mysteries. She helps others. She rights wrongs. She saves the day, solving baffling mysteries, and loves to do it. And that's basically her life. She has some good friends that follow her along on adventures, a special friend or boyfriend, Ned Nickerson, a cute little dog named Togo. So she's just a phenomenon, especially when she began in the 30s.
Mm-hmm. Doc, I'm going to ask, do you want to add anything to that?
Uh-oh. Doc, did we lose Doc?
Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I pulled my phone away from the ear for just a second. Would you ask again?
I'm sorry. So I asked Jennifer, who is Nancy Drew? She explained who Nancy Drew was, and I asked, do you want to add anything to that, Doc? Because I know.
No, that is a perfect summary of who Nancy Drew is. And
then also too, but you know what, Doc? I'm going to point out, I love the fact, because you mentioned something about that the popularity in the Beat article. You mentioned the popularity of the book in the 1930s.
Yeah, well, she launched in 1930, the year 1930, and she instantly caught fire. I mean, the kids were passing the books around during the Depression, like trading them like baseball cards, and reading them and rereading them and handing them around. She was, I mean, you read some of the books today, and it might seem kind of mild by today's standards, but by 1930, she was a firebrand. She was standing up to adults. She was contradicting adults. She was, she would get kidnapped and she would get herself out of trouble. She wouldn't wait for some guy to do it or wait for the police. She trespasses all the time. She commits breaking and entering in the service of solving crimes. I mean, she was bold, she was courageous, and she didn't need anybody. She had her Dr. Watsons were Bess and George, but they're of very little help, to be perfectly honest. And she sort of does it all. And that, I think, was a role, for the 1930s. I mean, that's to have a young female lead in an adventure type series or in a crime or mystery type series is fairly commonplace today. I mean, to be honest, we still need more of it, but in 1930 was just like a door opening.
Gavin, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think these two have definitely completely laid it out. I'm like you, my first exposure was the 70s TV series, so which was a pretty cool show. And I remember watching it as a family. But I would go on to discover the books around that time, and the art on the books left a huge impression on me because it was so evocative of story. But yeah, I'm like a 70s Nancy Drew kid like you.
Yes, because I'm just going to briefly say yes for listeners. When Nancy Drew came out in the 1970s, Pamela Sue Martin. That's all I remember. That was the first time I saw. That was she was the actress who played Nancy Drew in that TV series, and then the Hardy Boys, of course. Sean Cassidy, David Cassidy's brother, and Parker Stevenson. Yeah, Parker Stevenson. I can't remember the actor's name too well, but yeah, those were the actors that played, Nancy Drew and the Hardy, but yes.
I know for a fact that I think my mom watched the show because she had a crush on the Hardy Boys. As a kid, you know, you don't realize those things, but now that I remember back, I'm like, she really liked that feathered hair. She was really into those guys.
All right. So now Jennifer, like Doc has mentioned that, you know, that Nancy Drew back in the 30s was courageous, she was bold, she and when she stood up, I think when she stood up to adults, it wasn't out of rebellion, it was more of, no, this is what's really going on. Please listen to, you know, these are the facts, this is what's happening. Now, I'm going to ask you, because when I read the Wikipedia, I'm going to ask you, what kind of impact did Nancy Drew have on young women? And because she has an impact even, you know, recently, you know, in the, you know, so can I ask you about that?
Yeah, I mean, for many generations, so many different women and men too have read these books and treasured them and kind of considered her a role model. And she was inspiring because she showed a different side of womanhood. She wasn't just this domestic girl living at home, you know, taking care of the household. She did that to a degree in the books, but you know, she was motherless, so she didn't have all those constraints. She had a lot of freedom that most kids, you know, they have a mom saying you can't go out and do that. She didn't have that, and her dad treated her like an equal, which most kids don't have their parents treating them like an equal. You know, they're children and they have that place and that role. And so Nancy was this exciting, you know, person that was going out and having these adventures that most kids couldn't have other than vicariously through her. And so it was inspiring. And so many women and men have cited her as an influence. I mean, from police officers, detectives, lawyers, even doctors, teachers, librarians. I mean, you could go on and on, all the way up to the Supreme Court. Most of the women on the Supreme Court have cited Nancy Drew as an influence in their lives, which is pretty amazing. I like to joke that you could read a Nancy Drew book, become a Supreme Court justice. It's not that easy, but it's pretty cool that most of the women on the Supreme Court have talked about Nancy Drew as an influence.
Excuse me. So, all right. So thank you very much. So Doc and Gavin, so how did Wandering Planets get involved in creating this line of action figure?
Well, I have a good story. I'm going to interrupt Doc.
Oh, sorry.
Doc, you go ahead and then I'll tell my story.
Well, I was just going to say it is kind of interesting in the sense that there are very few toy lines that are based on literary properties, right? I mean, usually, like Katniss Everdeen didn't get an action figure till after the movies came out, just because pulling something from literary sources is difficult, because anyone who reads a book will imagine the characters a little bit different, and you know, even well-described characters are going to have differences in people's heads, and so it tends to be after there are visual representations of, you know, of something that then action figure line springs out. And Nancy's actually had 3 different television series over the years. I think 9 feature films. Jen can correct me if I'm wrong. Between 1930 and until recently, currently has a TV show on the CW that's starting its final season soon, but has been on the CW for years, and yet there's never an action figure line. I think part of it is that, of course, action figures, the action figure boom in the 80s, sort of Nancy predates by almost 50 years. And because there have been so many different adaptations of Nancy, you know, it's like, which movie are you pulling from? Which TV show are you pulling from? Like, where do you start if you're representing Nancy Drew? You know, she's for generations of readers, she's defined as being Titian haired, you know, a redhead, but in the early days she was a blonde. And you know, what sort of approach do you take? And so Gavin and I discussed doing the cover art, because those great, like some of those, like Gavin just talked about, like how influential seeing those covers were for him when he was a kid. There's just such wonderful art. In particular, an artist named Rudy Nappi. Our figures are based on that particular Nancy cover artist. He wasn't the first or the most recent Nancy cover artist, but he did some of those iconic covers in the 60s that were the ones that we saw on library shelves in the 80s. And those are some of the ones we're recreating. So it in many ways, it's a cover art line of figures as much as it is a line of mystery detective figures.
Gavin?
Yeah, well, I was just remembering this day that, Doc and I were well under our way on production for Prisoner, and he calls me up and he starts with, he says, "Hear me out before you say no."
That's right.
And I didn't know where he was coming from. And backstory, Doc and his wife are both big Nancy Drew fans, very well versed in all the books in the universe. And he pitches to me. He goes, "What if we did Nancy Drew?" And I was like, yes, instantly, because I remembered back to when I was a kid, sneaking around and going where I shouldn't have. And I was in my grandparents' attic on a holiday break, and going through boxes that my mom had packed up probably in the late 60s. And there's this box of Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew books, all of this era, and I'm just going through these books one by one, looking at these covers. And I was not a big reader as a kid, but I was getting stories told to me just from this art. Yes. And it left such a strong impression on me. So yeah, when Doc pitched that, I got brought back to that moment and that joy and that wonder and these larger than life dangerous situations they're having to get away from on these covers. And I was like, that's a toy, of course. Yeah, that'd be amazing. So yeah, it's Doc's fault, basically.
So, all right, now, Jen, I'm going to ask you, how did you get involved with the Action Line?
So I had an email from Doc and Gavin that asked me if I would be interested in consulting and helping them get this off the ground. They had done a lot of, pre-production work, even I think at that point, kind of coming up with ideas and stuff. And they reached out to me and I was like, oh yeah, that would be totally awesome. I grew up in the late 70s and 80s. And I love Star Wars, and I still have my Star Wars action figures from back then. They're not mint in package, unfortunately.
I'm sorry.
But I still have my little case with all my little Star Wars figures. And I loved action figures. And I don't know why I never thought about Nancy Drew action figures. Apparently the powers that be didn't either, because we never had them. For years, fans were always talking about, where's the Nancy Drew Barbie? Why haven't we had one of those? And I've never been a big doll person, but I love action figures. So when they asked me, I was thrilled to just get involved in some way, just to help make this happen.
That is so cool. All right. So Doc and Gavin, I'm going to ask, you guys mentioned that, the Nancy Drew action figures are based off the covers of the books. Because and obviously this is going to be an audio podcast, but can I just ask you, can you guys, for listeners, can you guys describe the attention to details, the color of dresses that she wears, accessory, and the packaging of this toy line?
For sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'll jump in and talk about, one lesson learned with Prisoner and with any kind of indie toy manufacturing is that we have to be really economical with our tooling space. And that's not just limited to the little guys like us. Once you start paying attention, you'll notice Hasbro and Mattel and all the big companies, they're pretty strategic with what they mold in a factory as well. And so our approach, we had to do for wave one on Nancy, Nancy Drews that were similar but different, that harkened the era, but were unique enough in their outfits to where you'd feel like you want, different versions of Nancy, because the fashion and the hairstyles are delightfully different on many of the covers. So is us zeroing in on what's iconic, what just truly speaks Nancy Drew, but then also what within that is strategic and within our means. And I, like all projects, you learn a ton. I didn't know what kind of skirts I was, gonna Google when we're looking to make a skirt look right for a book cover from 68 versus like 1970. we did that type of stuff. And then we also realized that, you know, and I think this maybe comes from our animation world, that, you know, you do bring in people who know more than you. There's no shame in it. You know, that's actually very smart. So we very quickly were like, yeah, we need, you know, someone like Jen to help police us and guide us. You know, not just on packaging, but on every detail of Nancy, because you know, the details are what make a toy cool and valuable. So that was on construction. I'll let Doc speak more to the packaging, which I'm just, you know, a huge fan of.
Yeah, we sort of very quickly hit upon this idea that the packaging should reflect the books. You know, we're coming from the cover art, so the book is essential to the concept of the toy line. And so Gavin sort of conceived this book packaging concept where we have some standard carded figures, you know, blister cards, like you know, people are used to buying action figures off the pegs in shops, but because those are great for the display, because you can see the toy through the blister and you know what you're buying. But for the Kickstarter campaign in particular, we've also got these book packages. So they sit on the shelf and look like a Nancy Drew book. They're the same size, they have the same cover art, they have the yellow spines, but you open up the book and the figure rests in there in a plastic tray that is removable. So you can remove the figures, you can put them back in, and then you can display the book packages on the shelf next to your Nancy Drew books. So it's sort of like there's a hidden mystery, a hidden secret inside these packages, which are the figure.
Gavin, or actually Jen, I'm going to start off with you, and then Gavin and Doc, please chime in. What were your reactions when you saw either, I guess, the Nancy Drew prototype figures or the final production? What was your reaction, Jen?
Well, when I saw the photos, I was just thrilled. I mean, the figures just came. It's like Nancy came to life off the covers. So I can't wait to actually be able to hold them in hand and get that tangible, you know, connection to them. But they were just great. I mean, they look like Nancy Drew just jumped right off the covers with her different accessories, and just brings the sort of that mystery in those books we love so much to life. So for me, that was a huge, huge thrill. And like they were just saying, the packaging is amazing. Packaging is everything in a lot of ways. And this packaging is amazing. And it's perfect, especially for the book collectors, a lot of whom will be buying these figures, is just having something we can put on the shelf like that with a little secret figure inside, you know, nobody knows about necessarily, but, you know, you can pull it off the shelf and open it up and take them out. And that, I think, was just insanely smart of them to do that. So
Gavin and Doc, you guys want to share your
well, just so we worked with Jenny Moore. Jenny is a longtime friend and graphic designer that I've known all the way back to when her and I both worked for Tokyo Pop, if you can believe that. Jenny has gone on to do lots of great design and art, and we brought her in, and we're very pleased, you know, when we did The Prisoner. And she just, as you know, the packaging on those figures is just is as exciting as the toy, for sure. And you know, we had every intention to get Nancy Drew assets to Jenny as fast as possible. And so she came, you know, knocked these things out of the park, and always, you know, we'll hit her with rough ideas, but then she always elevates everything, and you know, we give her a bad looking stick figure, and then she comes back with, you know, what you see. So yeah, that's another big part of the process, is just working with Jenny and letting her, you know, work her magic.
Doc, do you want to add anything?
That sums it up. That was perfect.
Now, this is going to be a little off the cuff comment, you know, because Doc, when you mentioned about, you know, the Nancy Drew, like the figure is like the pack, you know, you have the, you know, the blister cards, but also too, you have the Nancy Drew packaging where it's like a book secret case, if I'm using the right term. where you
Yeah.
open it up, you see the figure, and you can remove the plastic covering, pull the Nancy Drew out figure, and display it on your shelf. That's great.
Yeah, she'll sit on the shelf with your books, or she'll hide away inside the package. Absolutely.
Because this is the perfect segue, Doc, because I remember when we did our first interview about The Prisoner, and when we talked about toys, when we were played toys as action figures as kids, I remember you told me that you mentioned that it's like we were creating our own stories with action figures. Like, oh my God, that's right. And now as adult collectors who love the Nancy Drew stories and novels and so forth, I'm going to say majority of collectors in some sense, and you guys have known that we'll probably buy 2 action figures. One we got to keep in the keep it mint, but we got to pop open the second one. We have to pop that open because secretly, when nobody's looking, especially our wives or our husbands, we love to play with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
true.
Listen, there's a big push to make stories more and more interactive, right? And to involve people in stories in different ways. That's what AR is about. That's what VR is about. I mean, it's in essence what video games are. And I feel like in many ways toys were that. Like for us as we were kids watching Transformers in the 80s, watching G.I. Joe, and having the toys in hand, what we could do then is interact with the stories. They were storytelling tools, and we could use them to take these characters on these journeys that extended from the screen into the backyard, into the playground, or the sandbox, or whatever, wherever we could take them with us anywhere, road trips, and make them less boring. Toys there's an art to a lot of elements of toy making. There's an art to the sculpt, there's an art to the engineering of the articulation. There's a lot of arts that go into action figure making, but at the end of the day, I think the most exciting thing about them is that you can photograph them, you can display them, you can play with them, and you can tell new stories in your favorite worlds. They're a way to tangibly, interactively be a part of the story worlds that you engage with and that you love. And I think that's why they are, currently adult collecting is on the rise. There's a great New York Times article about it. And, I think it's because of this, because it's a storytelling tool. It's a tangibility. And there is a lot of intangible in a sort of digital and internet-driven world, which is great, which is helpful and cool. But toys are sort of the opposite of NFTs, right? Like, they're fungible. They're fungible tokens, right? Like, you can touch them, you can move them, you can display them in a way that a lot of our world is non-fungible, and this is the opposite of that.
Gavin, do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, once again, so well said. What do I add, right? But I think one of the things that's really become aware to me as a fan who collects, and as I interact with fans, especially after we did The Prisoner, which was like Nancy Drew, a property that just didn't have a lot of collectibles, modern collectibles for people. These worlds, these fantasy worlds that we love, we want to be able to celebrate them.
Yes.
And we want to be able to participate in these worlds. And it's hard. And one way to do so is with a collectible, right? Is with an action figure. So it's like, I absolutely I would want more than anything to be on the Enterprise in Star Trek. It's never going to happen. But if I put a little Picard and Riker on my shelf, I'm one step closer, right? I get to express that need, or that love of that fandom in that way. And I think part of the Wandering Planet, I don't know if we have a mission, is paying attention to those fandoms that have not yet been rewarded with a collectible.
Yes.
You know, Nancy's had some other stuff. Jen could probably tell you every, you know, what collectible, what year, you know, how many were made. But in this little niche, which is the action figure niche that Doc and I are so, you know, fond of, we just hadn't seen it, like The Prisoner. And so it felt right.
Jen, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think they did great, but I'll just say, you know, there's always a niche to be filled, and for some reason, nobody ever thought of Nancy Drew action figures. So it's almost mind-boggling after over 90 years, we haven't had something like this. There's been dolls, there's been games, there's been puzzles, a lot of stuff based on the television show, some things based on the books, and just cool stuff, but nothing like this. So this to me just almost revolutionizes and just re-energizes that collectible side of Nancy Drew. So I'm really excited.
It's crazy, Jen, right? Because it's right out there in front of you. She's an action hero. She takes action. She's very proactive. That is something, you know, a kid could replicate with a doll. But it's obviously something that you could, you know, you could have little adventures in your house or backyard with a Nancy action figure. It'll feel like she's like an extension of the book. So it is crazy that that line hadn't been crossed, that someone hadn't come up with it. But you know, we're glad because we want to be the ones to do it. Yeah,
and you know, one of the fans out there on the Facebook was joking about how there's Elf on the Shelf, and now we can have Nancy Drew on the shelf, and she was kind of talking about that. So it's just cute, some of the things the fans come up with, you know, to celebrate Nancy Drew, and they're really excited about these action figures.
That's good to hear.
Gavin, I'm going to start off with you, then Jen and Doc, you know, please, you know, contribute. You know, I know that there are 9 tiers and 2 of them have add-ons. Now, 6 of the tiers focus on a specific book cover, such as, like one of the Nancy Drew figures is The Secret of the Old Clock. Now, how did you guys select which cover to use to make the figures from?
Cool. Well, yeah. Thanks for bringing up the tiers. And I will say, because what's interesting about, and we had this with Prisoner, and we're already seeing it with Nancy Drew, which is awesome, is that we're having fans of these properties come to Kickstarter for the first time, who have not Kickstarted stuff and are not familiar with the language of tiers or pledges and stuff. So it's great that you brought that up so we can better explain. And the point I was going to run to is that with add-ons, you know, in a Kickstarter, there's like, okay, I'm going to pledge for this figure. But man, I sure wanted that, you know, that figure on the 3rd tier. With an add-on, you can do that. And we've made everything except for the exclusive shirt in the all-in add-ons. So don't be intimidated if there is a combination of tiers that you want and don't see. You can just do an add-on. You know, I want to get the 4-pack of carded figures, but I'd like the Hidden Clock Nancy in a book package. You can add that on. Anyways, I'll get away from that sales pitch and say that what figures to do. I mean, the Hidden Clock was the figure we knew. Like that's what you lead with. That is just so Nancy Drew, especially at least for the era that we're approaching of these book covers. And then it was just, you know, what book cover makes a good toy, you know, and also has a cool is also an artifact from a really good story inside that book cover. So that was kind of our approach. I'd say on all of them.
Doc?
Oh, I was going to say, I love every figure we're doing, but probably my favorites are the 2-pack sets that you mentioned. Because they're both so unique and so cool. We're doing a book called The Crooked Banister, which is not, I mean, Secret of the Old Clock, Hidden Staircase. These are the iconic Nancy Drew books, right? Crooked Banister is a little bit more off the radar, and it's a weird one because the story is about, Nancy's father Carson, who was an attorney, has a client who was cheated by a con man. The con man goes missing, and Nancy's enlisted to try to find the whereabouts of the missing con man, and it investigates a house that the con man built, but it is a bizarre, it's like the Winchester Mystery House. She has to cross a moat of flame to get to the house on like a metal ramp. When she goes in, there is literally a crooked banister, that sort of staircase that leads into nothing. There's secret compartments and just this bizarre house. One of the things is there's this robot inside that is a tape programmed robot, and that attempts to crush the life out of her with its big metal arms, which presumably is a program that was programmed in by tape. And it's just so fantastic and fun, and so weird, and so sort of not. Nancy doesn't usually do physical battle with robots, right? So it's really kind of off the beaten track, and so I was excited that we were doing that. We've got the robot, and it's an excellent sculpt by one of the sculptors we worked with, and it's phenomenal. And the other 2-pack set is based on Lilac Inn, which is a really the cover of this is a story in and of itself, because what you see in the foreground, what you see at the center of the cover is what looks like the ghost of Nancy Drew, and then in the foreground you see the back of the head of someone with black hair looking at the ghost of Nancy Drew, right? And it is so bizarre. It's like, is this Nancy's ghost or what is happening? But in the story, Nancy sort of doesn't have a recurring villain in the Moriarty sense, like Sherlock Holmes has Moriarty. But maybe the closest thing, at least in my mind, and I mean, Jen can correct me, but the closest thing in my mind is the bad guy from the villainess from this book. Her name is Gay Moreau, and she is a con woman and stage actress, who uses disguises to sort of commit her crimes and her forgeries. She's gone to jail for forgery. And what you're seeing on this cover is Gay, dressed in disguise as Nancy Drew, who is in disguise as the ghost of the Lilac Inn. and in the foreground, the figure with black hair is Nancy, who is also in disguise in a black wig, hiding out to try to catch the ghost, right? So it is a really weird little circumstance, and it was immortalized by this really great cover, and I'm really glad we're doing the figures of it.
Jen, I'm going to ask, did you have any input on like which covers to do or anything? Or
I'm trying to remember if I made them some suggestions, but I think they kind of just had a great idea just between being fans and Doc's wife, in the books they have, just kind of had some good ideas kind of on where to go. Like, I might never have suggested Crooked Banister because it's such a wacky book, and it's never been one that's been listed a ton, like say Hidden Staircase, as a favorite. The cover's iconic though. I mean, it's this Pepto-Bismol pink cover, Nancy's real bright, and this is that creepy robot. I always thought it was kind of a fun book, and I always had an affection for the robot. And so just to see them take that and create a figure out of the robot was just really cool. And like Doc was saying about this Lilac Inn cover, I think when I was a kid and I first saw the cover, I was so confused before I read the book, because I thought that was Nancy. And then when you read the book, you realize who and what is going on the cover. And it's just such a bizarre cover in some ways for Nancy Drew. But it's so cool that they were able to do both figures and have that sort of translucent figure for Nancy's doppelganger. So I thought that was an awesome way that they brought these two covers to life. My favorite book was The Hidden Staircase and Old Attic was also a favorite. So I've been thrilled to see figures made out of those, especially. But just the whole thing is I've just been fangirling all over the place with these figures.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. Doc, I'm going to start off with you. Can you talk about the amazing add-ons? Because there is, I think, now correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's only 2 exclusive add-ons that's only exclusive to this Kickstarter.
Yeah, you're right. There are exclusives to the Kickstarter. My phone broke up a little bit at the beginning of the question. Oh, no. Would you mind repeating it?
No, that's no problem. So, I'm just gonna ask, like, because there are a couple add-ons to this that's only exclusive to the Kickstarter. You know, can you talk about that? You know, I'll let you answer that, then I'll ask Gavin and Jen to, you know, to chime in.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you about the silhouette figures. So what is another thing that's iconic to Nancy Drew covers of a certain era, because, you know, she's been in continuous publication for over 90 years. So, you know, there are things that sort of are standbys for decades at a time, and then sort of, you know, get changed and then just get brought back. You know, end papers, for example. I miss end papers a lot, but one of the things that's sort of iconic to the cover of a certain era of Nancy Drew is these silhouettes. It's a silhouette, it's an all black silhouette in the shape of Nancy Drew, and there are a couple of different versions of it, a couple different you know, the posing and the clothes were a little bit different depending on the era, but basically it's this wonderful, I mean, it says mystery. Like she's no matter what version of the silhouette you're looking at, she's clearly in the middle of investigating, but everything is dark. You don't know what's going on. Like it's these wonderful little icons. And we thought, how fun would it be to do an action figure of the silhouette? So we have this all black action figure that replicates the silhouette that you can display on a stand that is all black, with behind it, you know, the Nancy Drew books of the era when I was reading are iconic for their yellow spines and the yellow on their covers, but the older sort of versions were these sort of a blue textile kind of cover, and we've got a backdrop that rests behind the stand. And then you can pose your figure like a silhouette. Comes in a hanging bag, so it's a separate kind of packaging from everything else, and exclusive only to the campaign. So even if these Nancy Drew figure line goes on beyond crowdfunding or in some way gets retail distribution, you're not ever going to get this figure in any other place.
And Doc, there's one more add-on that's only exclusive to the Kickstarter. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we couldn't believe we got permission to do this. But Simon & Schuster's, who owns Nancy Drew and who we licensed the figures from, these are officially licensed figures, gave us permission to write a new Nancy Drew story. I say us, we're not writing it. It's being written by an official Simon & Schuster, Carolyn Keene. But you know, Nancy is of course still in publication. New Nancy Drew books come out all the time, but they are modernized and they're more stylistically contemporary, and therefore even younger readers, my 6-year-old reads them. And we're doing a new Nancy Drew mystery story in the style of the original, of the Mildred Wirt Benson era classic Nancy Drew story. It's a novella, not a full novel. So it'll be the equivalent of 5 chapters of the original novels, which were either 25 or 20 chapters, depending on the edition, and it'll be the equivalent of 5 chapters. It's being written by an official Carolyn Keene. We're going to publish it in the same size format so it can stick on your shelf with your classic Nancy Drew novels. It is got a cover by Ruth Sanderson, who is a classic Nancy Drew cover artist. We were able to connect with her through Jen, and she did an original Nancy Drew cover for our novella. We are only able to offer it through this campaign. It's an incentive for collectors. It's not going to be in bookstores. It's not a Simon & Schuster book release. It's unique to this campaign.
Gavin, do you want to add anything to what Doc said, like your excitement when you heard about you guys are doing a novella?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, like Doc said, I just can't believe we're getting to do it. It's like pretty surreal. And it's, you know, what better way to celebrate a literary hero than with another adventure of that literary hero. So yeah, super excited. And it's also an opportunity for me to mention how amazing Simon & Schuster has been to work with on this project. They've just championed everything we've tried to do. It's been great. I'll brag a little bit about kind of a third exclusive, which is the T-shirt that comes with our all-in pledge. We like a book, we're not set up to just sell apparel, but as an incentive, with the campaign, we were able to use some of the classic Nancy Drew cover art, and we kind of put it through the filter of what if this was like, Nancy Drew art meets a concert shirt from the 70s. So we picked a cover that has a real rock and roll kind of, vibe with a skull and the old oak tree. And then on the back of the shirt where, anybody who is not a Nancy Drew hardcore fan will glance at it and think it's concert dates. But if you actually read the text on the back, it's the original, is it 52 or 57? The original run
56.
Of 50. Oh, thank you. I'm not a numbers guy. It's the original 56 Nancy Drew book titles, all listed out. So it's basically like a cool Nancy Drew shirt disguised as a rock tee. And Jenny, our designer, worked with us to get it just right. And I'm really excited that we get to throw that into the mix of the cool stuff we're making.
Jen, before I get to you, so I'm going to ask only 4 more questions because I'm trying to slowly wrap this up because I don't want to keep you guys too much. Either Gavin or Doc, how did you guys come up with this is an off-the-cuff question. How did you guys come up with the idea of doing a novella for this campaign?
I think that was in Doc's head. That was all Doc.
Yeah, I mean, it just sort of seemed natural. It was by the seat of our pants. What if we could do this? Yes. Like they're not going to let us do this, right? Like they're not, like the book company is not going to let us compete with their books by selling our own books, are they? But honestly, I didn't think it was going to happen, and they were more than supportive. They were super excited.
Now, Jen, my question to you about the novella, I'm going to ask, I'm just asking, were you able to look through the story? Were you able to read the story, a draft or anything?
It's still being written, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I did kind of help provide a synopsis or some ideas for it. I kind of said it should focus on the figures themselves and draw them into this story, because then, they're both hand in hand. So there's that synergy. So I suggested that, and I helped them find the cover artist because Doc reached out and he was like, who would you suggest to do this? And Ruth Sanderson illustrated the early classic Nancy Drew paperbacks, starting with 57 on for a few. And, so she was that early classic paperback illustrator and very classic style Nancy. And she's still doing amazing illustration art today. So I said, contact her. She'd probably love to do it. And she did. So that was cool.
So I'm sorry, Gavin or Doc, I'm sorry, someone was going to comment on something.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, and Jen's being humble. She's been instrumental in the approach on the novella and getting it to where we are so far. And yeah, we have our premise. It's all laid out. It will be written by our Carolyn Keene while we're working with the factory to pour plastic and get the toys just right. So it will all hit. But it was important for us to launch the campaign with everyone knowing what the cover would look like. So that's why so much attention went into the cover first, because we're celebrating covers in many ways. But yeah, I can't wait. We're going to run every bit of the story through the Gen filter, so we know we're getting it right.
Nice. All right. Sorry, about 3 more questions. So, Doc or Gavin, let's say if someone misses out on this campaign, will there, will this be, will the figures be on the Wandering Planet Toys website in the future?
They'll be completely screwed. They'll never be able to get these toys again. They absolutely have to fund and buy them now. Now, we really hope that this, sparks a blaze of Nancy Drew product for us to offer. But the truthful answer, and I'm being really honest, just based on our experience with The Prisoner, is that if you do see this and you do love these, then the best thing to do is pledge, because one, that puts us a step closer to making them reality. We can't do it without the pledges. And two, there's a huge gap between our backers getting these figures and us getting them distributed and into a retail space. So the people who come on early, one of the extra rewards of that is that you're going to get your toys probably 9 months to a year before other people can even have a shot at them. And that's not a strategy on our part. That's not us being elitist. It's just the reality of a small toy company. You know, so yeah, if people are into them, I highly say, I suggest, you know, join us now and pledge, because it helps in many ways. And then you're just guaranteed to get the figures you want. That being said, we do hope to bring versions of these to retail and to comic book shops and stuff. But that will be a separate part of the journey and a little bit down the line.
Now, 2 more questions. I'm going to ask this question to you, Doc, because I want to talk just one question about The Prisoner. Now, if there are any listeners, you know, who is a big Prisoner fan of the TV show, and they missed out on the Kickstarter, is there any way for them to, you know, get any of those action figures?
Well, right now we are working on a distribution deal that will get the Prisoner figures back out. We get demands and requests all the time to sell them again or to bring them back out. And we're stock just sold out so quickly that we don't really have that much surplus that we can distribute in any other way. But we are currently working to bring more Wave 1 figures out so that they can reach people. Like Gavin said, the guys, the people that backed our Kickstarter campaign have them in hand. People who still want them are sort of waiting until that next opportunity comes up. I can tell you definitively, though, that we're doing a Wave 2 of figures as well. So it won't be just this wave coming in the future. It'll be a whole nother set. And we look forward to, you know, when the time is right, announcing what figures are going to be in wave number 2.
Okay, so I'm going to make this clear. I'm just joking on this part. Oh my God, Gavin and Doc, you just want me to take my wallet right now?
Done. Yeah.
And for listeners, when I interviewed Doc and Gavin about the Prisoner Kickstarter, you know, I went online, I went on the Kickstarter, I made my pledge and everything. And then while I'm interviewing them, they're going, oh yeah, Jason, also too, we only have this exclusive Prisoner, the Arrival action figures, only exclusive to the Kickstarter. That's all they had to say. And what happened? I know this is only audio, but I got that figure.
Oh, there he is.
I had
Love it. Love it. And that's, you know, that's the silhouette figure for Nancy. You know, that's the special one. That's the one that you hold up in your collection and say, you know, I was there at the beginning and I helped these guys make it happen. And I have this figure that you can't buy anywhere else. And we know to do that because we're collectors and we're excited when we get our hands on stuff like that ourselves.
Okay. Last question. And Gavin, I'm going to start off with you, Doc and Jen. Any closing words to our listeners?
Oh, wow. Well, first, thank you, Jason, just for the enthusiasm and, you know, your time and always just supporting the crazy stuff we're trying to do. And to your listeners, you know, thank you. And, you know, just keep doing what you do. And we keep doing, you know, it's good to be a fan. It's good to celebrate things and to run with your imagination. And we do it. And we're glad you do it, and the world needs more of it.
Doc?
And I'll say thank you to the listeners for listening, and please consider backing our Kickstarter because we can't make these action figures without you. Nancy Drew, after 90 years, after almost a century, deserves action figures, and so please help get us across the finish line. Please help us make these figures happen.
Jen?
And just as a fan, I mean, they've gone above and beyond the call of duty as far as a fan goes, and looking at this, even though I've been helping behind the scenes. I know fans are thrilled. I know they're out there pledging their support. I mean, we're over the halfway mark already, and it's just been a little over 24 hours. So the fans are turning out. They're really excited. And I can't say enough about this. It's just, as a fan and as a collector, it's amazing. And I tell everybody, get a set to keep minty, because that's what we do as collectors, but get a set to play with, because you're going to want to take them out and get that tangible nostalgia going. So yeah, thank you for having us.
It's true. It's not fun until you put the screwdriver into Nancy's hand and she opens up the mysterious old clock.
And those are the accessories.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Jen, I'm just joking on this part. As adult collectors, we do not play with our toys. We just pose them on our shelves. Right, Doc and Gavin?
Yeah.
And we do that a lot.
Yeah. Gavin, Doc, and Jen, mahalo. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview all of you. I wish you a big success with the Nancy Drew Kickstarter campaign. Thank you. I just wish you all the success, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Mahalo.
Thank you, Jason.
Mahalo.
And again, I want to give Hannah Bahedri of Superfan Promotions a big shout out for asking Comics for Fun and Profit to do this interview. And Hannah, thank you very much for all your work behind the scenes in setting up this interview. Thank you very much. Now, if you are a big Nancy Drew fan or a toy collector, please check out this Kickstarter campaign. It is live right now and will end on May 17th. And this part, I'm really being serious. I am. If you are a husband, a partner, or a friend and know someone who loves Nancy Drew, I really think that this would make a great birthday or Christmas present, when it comes out. I really do, And I want to thank Drew, the host of Comics for Fun and Profit, for putting this episode together. Drew, thank you very much for all your hard work behind the scenes. And if you are a new listener, please check out new episodes of Comics for Fun and Profit that comes out every Saturday. And I want to thank you, the listeners. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening to this episode. Until next time, guys. Aloha.
As you know, our LCS is Cowabunga Comics, Lake Country, Wisconsin's best pop culture destination for new comics, back issues, gaming, retro video games, vinyl, and figures. Give them a call, 262-569-9999. Check them out online at cowabungacomics.com or follow them on Twitter at Incredicow. They are our LCS, and we utilize their deep discount mail order service to bring Oconomowoc, Wisconsin closer to us. They'll take care of you. Tell them Drew and Kyle sent you. Say hi to Eric and James from us. If you need an LCS, you can't go wrong with Cowabunga Comics. The good folks at Comics for Fun and Profit have been doing 2 episodes a week for quite some time now, and it's all thanks to, first of all, Jason, and second of all, our patrons, who allow us to add the space on our server, broadcast more, store more, share more with you, the listeners. I'm envious of those of you who have unlimited storage and media server capabilities. We pay for ours here at the C4FAP. It ain't cheap. We thank you so much for those of you who go to patreon.com/comicsfunprofit and contribute at any level to say thanks, to say, I want to be a part of your Slack channel conversations. I want to get exclusives. I want to get early access. I want to get ad-free access. I want to get swag. I want to get some free stuff. Whatever your reasoning is, we appreciate it at any level because it does make a difference. So from the bottom of Kyle and I and Jason's heart, thank you for contributing.